In the earlier days, the AMA was explicit. They would say, we need to reduce the number of doctors because we're not making enough money. Now they
Yes.
wouldn't talk like that. Instead, they'll say, we're only concerned about this health and safety of the patients. And we don't think it's safe for them to uh, have a midwife do the delivery, let's say. They're doing it only for altruistic reasons.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 333. I am talking to Dr. Jeffrey Singer. He's in Arizona. He has been a medical doctor. He's written a book called Your Body, Your Healthcare. And we're going to talk about the history of medical regulations and how this disastrous system got the way it is today. How are you, Jeff?
I'm good, thanks. And I'm going to hold up a copy for
Yeah.
people to see. It's called Your Body, Your Healthcare. It's available wherever books are sold, or you can go to the Cato website and get it there too. It was published by the
Kindles
Cato
and ebooks
Institute.
too.
Pardon me?
Electronic books as well.
Yes, yes, it's available on ebooks and Kindle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love ebooks. It's funny you just don't want to have those books around anymore, especially when you move again. But so how are you, Jeff? Jeff, I do like to ask, how did you get into free market healthcare, or how did you become a free market healthcare person or a libertarian?
Well, I started off by being a libertarian first.
Yes.
When I was actually an undergrad back in 1969 to 1973 is when I self-identified as a libertarian. There wasn't a Libertarian Party yet either, so it was a small L libertarian. It was those were very turbulent years in college in those days, as you know,
Mm,
and you kind of had to decide where you stood. I was a pre-med student. I wanted to be a doctor, but you couldn't avoid the issues, and I was always concerned about political philosophy and public policy, and I started reading, and by the time I was in about my sophomore year of college, I said, "Oh, this must be what I am then," and I and I've been that way ever since. Then I went into medicine, and then I started to practice, and now I'm my practice is over 40 years old. I grew it from a single solo practice to a large group of surgeons, and I'm a president emeritus now because I was an adjunct at the Cato Institute for a number of years, and then 8 years ago, or exactly 8 years ago, because I'm getting, in the upper age bracket now, so, I was ready for a change, and, I stepped back from the practice. I'm still practicing, but only part-time. I'm president emeritus of my practice, and I turned my attention full-time to working for the Cato Institute, where I'm a senior fellow, and being that I'm in the health field, it kind of made sense that I'd work in the health policy studies department. As I'm sure you know, uh, if you're a libertarian, I talk about gun policy, I could talk
mm.
about foreign policy, I could talk about a lot of things, but, you know, I work in the healthcare field,
Yes.
so it made sense for me to get into that, and so I've been doing a lot of work, now for about 8 years, and, about a year ago, my director, Michael Cannon, who's the director of health policy studies, convinced me to write a book.
Mm,
And so what I've done is I've taken a lot of the areas that I have focused on as a doctor, because I'm not a health economist, Michael is, and I kind of put it all together, uh, kind of tied together by this overarching thread that we as adults are autonomous, and that the state, the government, is basically continuously interfering in our right to make our own health care decisions and choices,
mm.
whether that's, for example, and this is where we're going to get into health regulation. We, the government tells us what kind of people we're allowed to seek medical opinions and advice from through licensing laws. It tells us who we could pick, we could choose to treat us. It tells us what medicines we're going to be allowed to take and whether or not it's gonna require us to get a permission slip from another autonomous adult like ourselves, that's a permission meaning a prescription, who happens to be a licensed gatekeeper, a healthcare
Yeah.
practitioner. It tells us what kind of substances we could put into our body, even if they're not medicines. And it even interferes with our ability to take steps to reduce the risk of some of our personal choices by laws like drug paraphernalia laws, et cetera, that interfere with harm reduction strategies that we would otherwise avail ourselves of. So basically, the government is in our business continuously. So what I do is
Mhm.
rather than take the healthcare policy issue, which is commonly done, from a more of a consequentialist approach, where we this is the policy, this is all of the unintended consequences. Here's a way to fix it. Instead, I'm taking it from more of a moral, ethical standpoint. So, for example, when we get to I have two chapters about the FDA. When I talk about the FDA, I constantly reframe it because we get in this we all get into these habits of saying, the FDA approved this drug for us to use to treat such and such condition. Well, actually, that's really not the way to frame it. The way to frame it is the FDA finally got out of my way and let me have access to this drug that I've been wanting to try to treat this condition.
Mhm.
That's the way we should look at it. But
Yeah.
we all fall into the habit because that's the way the discussion is usually run, in the public square. Will the FDA approve this? Will the FDA approve that? Is this legal? Is that legal? Is it okay for me to use an e-cigarette? Is
Yeah.
it okay for me to use nicotine pouches? All these kind of things. It's always the government gave me permission. No, actually, I have the right to do this stuff. The government maybe finally got out of my way in a couple of areas or reduced some of the barriers that it places in my path, but I shouldn't have to get permission. So that's basically the way I approach everything through the book.
Yeah.
But the first chapter I get into first principles, talking about what is autonomy, the right to self-medicate, and that kind of thing, informed consent. And I do a little history and philosophy. I do cite a lot of like John Stuart Mill's work. But then I start getting into different areas that I've done work on. I give a historical background, I give a moral, philosophical background, and then I have to discuss some of the policies. I try to keep it as far from being wonky as possible because I don't want to get boring. Unless you want to do research in this area, you don't need to know all the gory details, just the kind of the bullet point, the elevator pitch. And then I also have to give proposals. Okay, so what would you do to get us back to more of a situation where we respect autonomy in this area? And being that I work for a think tank that hopes to get some of our work looked at by people in power, uh, we always start off by saying this is the ideal because that's what we're about. But then we also have to give them some things to work with. And we live in a real world where we know that our ideal is not likely to happen anytime real soon. So after stating the ideal, and this is what I do in my book, I say, now, if that's not politically feasible at this time, here's something that's a second best choice that at least moves us that way. And if that's not feasible, here's a third best choice, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I do things in a book. At the end of the book, I make the point that my profession, it took a while, but finally, for the last 50 years, it's become part of a bedrock of medical ethics that we need to respect our patients' autonomy, that we can't do anything without their fully informed consent. And if they don't consent, that no matter how much we think they're making a big mistake by not listening to us, we just have to respect that. And so it took us a long time, but we finally got there. And I argue that maybe it's my profession then that should really take the lead in fighting to get the government to respect our autonomy as well. And I propose in the last chapter a new Hippocratic oath for a free society. It's in that's how I close the book.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, I do wanna stay on the topic of healthcare, but there's
Yeah.
one question I gotta ask. You were in college 69 to 73.
Mhm.
What did you pay?
Well, I went to Brooklyn College, City University of New York,
Okay.
free tuition.
Oh,
So,
okay.
actually, it was a $50 a semester matriculation.
Oh,
And that was, one of the reasons why the city went bankrupt, you might remember in the mid-70s.
oh, yeah.
Now
Yeah,
they
they have
charge
those free
tuition.
colleges. Yeah, New York is, yeah, it's and they don't learn, but I always ask
No, now they plan to have free grocery stores, right?
yeah,
They're talking about it, so
yeah, I that's just always, anytime I get somebody who's yeah, somebody who went to college in that area, I'm just always, amazed. But anyway, so, you got into this and, now so when do you, you're probably aware of maybe the quote from Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration of Independence. He said, "We must put medical freedom into the Constitution."
yeah, very much aware
But
of it.
when do you think healthcare in America started to go down this path of, it's there's, we've got restricted supply, subsidized demand, and third party payments, and that is why it's
Yeah.
the cluster
There's a whole lot of moving parts.
Yeah,
And in fact, uh, another book that if people are really interested in this, I'd recommend that came out of the Cato Institute about 4 or 5 years ago called Overcharged: Why Americans Pay Too Much for Healthcare. And it's by Charles Silver and David Hyman. They're both adjuncts at the Cato Institute. And that goes into a lot of now that's like an 800-page book and it's very wonky, but it gets into all the moving parts because this includes things like patent laws, FDA regulation, licensing laws, medical
yeah,
licensing laws, also the income tax code and how it favors third party payment system. Because there's so many. There's not like one simple fix. There's
yeah,
a whole bunch, and they're all interrelated now too. And
mhm,
so you can't even attack one without having to attack others. But so that's a good book if you wanna get into the serious
yes,
stuff. But to in general, in this country, I talk about this in chapter 2, up until the mid to late 1800s, we generally had freedom in healthcare.
yeah,
At a time when Benjamin Rush was practicing medicine, we had healthcare freedom. Of course, so, in the American Medical Association was founded in 1848, and part of its mission statement was to get doctors licensed. And I'm sure listeners to your podcast know that you never hear a situation of consumers going to the state government and saying, "You got to license these guys. They're dangerous." You always hear the incumbent uh, uh, businesses going to the state legislature and say, "You gotta license us because there are a lot of people who wanna compete with us that aren't as good as us, and you need to protect the rest of the consumers from them, and so they can only go to us safe guys." That's usually what it is. So, and back in the early 1800s, before we had the scientific advances we have now, there were about 4 or 5 different competing schools of thought on medicine, and they were all about equally in those days equally valid, I mean, nobody really knew. Benjamin Rush was a big proponent of bleeding people, for example.
yeah,
And he was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. So they had all these different competing thoughts, and the MDs are called allopathic, and they were the ones they formed the AMA, and they went to state legislatures in the early 1800s saying you should license us because there are a lot of these other guys, the ones who believe in botanicals or the homeopaths or whomever,
yeah.
and they're not good. They're dangerous. And they were rebuffed. Lawmakers in those days said, What are you talking about? License? What's a license? You mean you want the state to give you permission to make a living? This is a free country. You don't need permission to make a living.
Wow.
That was the way it was. "Oh, really?" I mean, the doctor says, "Well, yeah, but, there's a lot of doctors, people who call themselves doctors that don't know what the heck they're doing, and they're dangerous." And the response was, "Well, they're not gonna last very long, are they? So, go away." And that's how it was. By around the days of Andrew Jackson, a few states kind of acquiesced, but even then, like New York State licensed doctors, but you didn't have to have a license to practice. So you could it was almost like like the government is providing a seal of approval.
Yeah,
So you could say, I'm better than that guy because 'cause I'm licensed, so pick me." But it wasn't a barrier to practicing. Then after Andrew Jackson came into power, there was this anti-cronyism sentiment, a populist sentiment, and all those states that had those, the few states that had license laws repealed them.
Wow,
So
yeah.
it wasn't until like the late 1800s, after the Civil War, when it was the beginnings of the progressive movement, you were already starting to see licensing of certain trades and occupations. So it was no longer an alien concept to bring up at the state legislature. And the AMA was, they did, by the way, everything according to the book. They didn't do anything illegal. They formed chapters in every state,
Mhm.
and they coordinated, and they would go before state law legislatures and persuade them to license. And they even merged. Most people don't know this. I didn't know this till I did my research for the book. The homeopathic medical doctors we have today are not the same ones we had back in the 1800s, because the two biggest groups in those days were the allopaths, which are the MDs, and the homeopaths. So they decided to join forces and merge, and together went before the legislatures to ask for licensing of doctors, and the homeopaths and the allopaths became one MD degree. Uh, Osteopaths, which people know now, DO, that school of thought didn't even start into the really get going until the late 1800s, 1890s. And they were locked out for a long time, up until the last 30 years or so.
Mhm.
So anyway, they go to a legislature and they get a licensing board created. And the licensing board consisted generally of members of the state chapter of the medical association. And then this board, so it's like a kind of like a union shop. And this board, in order to grant you a license, would require that you graduated from a medical school that's accredited by the AMA. They
Yeah,
created their own accrediting organization, which to this day exists. It's gone through different name changes, but now it's called the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, but it's the AMA. And so you got to go to an AMA accredited medical school, and then you got to do at least 1 year of residency in a basic. There's a thing called ACGME, which again sprung from the AMA, which is an ACGME accredited residency program, or you can't get a license.
yeah,
And they also had certain rules, like, you know, how there's different there were some doctors who were willing to work, on a retainer for certain companies, you know, "Pay me X amount, and I'll take care of all your employees." They didn't like that. They want a fee for service. If we AMA catch you, doing a contract like Kaiser Permanente does, you know, the prepaid care, we're gonna kick you out of the AMA.
yeah,
And, so that helped nurture the fee for service thing. And so, for most of the 20th century, this is what created a cartel. Then other fields would try to get into, you know, as medical science advanced, a lot of the, what we call, you know, ancillary medical fields, podiatry, foot surgery, come up with a
get it.
nurse practitioner. Well, dentists were separate, but they said, "Hey, that's a good idea. We should do the same thing." So the dentists got licensing of dentists, following the AMA's lead. But the other medical kind of fields, uh, nurse practitioners, podiatrists, physical therapists, all those kind of fields. They started, you know, they in the early days, they were more like helpers, or, you know, they complemented the doctor's practice, but then they started learning more, and they got to the point where they could do a lot of the same things that the MD could do, maybe not as advanced stuff, but they could do a lot of the everyday stuff, and maybe save people some money by not having to go to the overtrained guy for that stuff. But if they tried it, they'd be practicing without a license, and they get they can get into trouble, because you had to have a license to practice medicine. So that actually, in a way, served as an incentive for all these other fields to get licenses, because, I mean, some, like the American Dental Association, said, "Hey, that's a good idea. We better stop dental hygienists and other people like that from trying to muscle into our work. So let's get dentists licensed." But Dr. Scholl in Chicago created this field of podiatry. And if his graduates of the Scholl School of Podiatry tried to do podiatry, the medical association would go after them, saying you're practicing medicine without a license. So they ended up fighting for and succeeding in getting podiatry licensed. So now you can't accuse me of practicing medicine without a license because I'm practicing podiatry with a license. So it's almost like licensing begat other licensing. So that kind of thing happened. And so by the mid 20th century, you had the medical and dental cartels, and then, in 1910, there was something really interesting. The American Medical Association, like I said, was accrediting medical schools, and if you didn't graduate from a medical school that they accredited, then you couldn't get a license. So there were lots of different ways to get medical education, even in the early 20th century. Some medical schools were 6 years, some were 4, some were 2, some required you to have a bachelor's degree before you can go, some didn't. Um, the ones that became the models were the 2, Harvard and Johns Hopkins. They were among the first to have where they would wanted you to have a bachelor's degree before they even accept you into medical school, and it was a 4-year program with a lot of emphasis on research and that kind of thing. So, the AMA, commissioned Abraham Flexner, who was a nationally renowned educator, an education policy expert, and they asked him to report to them, give them like a white paper on what do you think would be the ideal way to structure medical education because there's so many different varieties. And he ended up proposing, it's called the Flexner Report, 1910. I think he issued the report in 1913, and he ended up proposing that the model we have today, which is you have to have a bachelor's degree before you could even apply, 4 years, heavy emphasis on research, that kind of thing. And the AMA adopted it and said, "Okay, from now on, our accrediting division is only gonna accredit medical schools that are structured according to the way Professor Flexner recommends." And within a year, 50% of the country's medical schools disappeared because they didn't meet that criteria. 50%, okay? In addition to that, there's a lot of racism in those days, so a lot of medical schools wouldn't accept African Americans. So there were 7 black medical schools, and if you look at the data on that, they actually had better student-teacher ratios than the other medical schools, but only 2 of them met the Flexner criteria. So 5 of the 7 black medical schools disappeared. Those
Yeah.
2 still exist today. Howard University in Washington, DC, and Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. And that exacerbated things also because not only did we get rid of a lot of medical schools, which is just what the doctors they were actually explicit about this. We gotta stop the production. We're getting too many doctors here. We can't make a good living. They actually said this. So if you could see, this is not
Yeah.
hidden. But there's also now that medical school became much more expensive because first you have to go to college too. So in the beginning of the 20th century, there were more females than male doctors. In fact, in the 1800s, more women went into medicine because it was kind of associated with, the woman is the one who takes care of everybody. She's the nurse of the household. She's the one, the man's out there working in the fields and the woman is making sure everybody stays healthy. So they
Dr. Flynn, for example.
yeah, yeah, a lot of women went into medicine. But by after the Flexner report and medical schools became so expensive, a lot of families started saying, "Look, I can't afford to spend all this money on my daughter who may then have a child and after all that money and time has been invested, after just a few years, stop practicing medicine. So I'm sorry, honey, you're not going to medical school. If you want to get a college education, go be a teacher or a nurse." And that's what happened. So all of a sudden, women disappeared from medical school, as did a lot of uh, poor people, immigrants, minorities. Um, and it wasn't until like 1960s and 70s that, you know, the AMA changed its policy under a lot of pressure, and they started opening up again to different, a wider variety of groups. But but that's what created a kind of a real kind of tight knit, closed shop. So that's one of the things you're talking about medical regulation. Then there's also, regulation when it comes to drugs, which I get into in my book also. That's
Yeah.
chapters 4 and 5. So,
Yeah.
You wanna talk about that a little bit about
What
yeah.
one thing I did wanna ask you, what was the typical path for let's say I'm a kid in 1850 and I said, "I wanna be a doctor." What was the path? Were they usually just go to apprenticeships, or what would they do
There's a
before?
lot of that, yeah.
Yeah, and
Or
probably a
you
lot of cases with fathers and sons too, I suppose.
exactly. There was, like, the first medical school in the United States was Thomas Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, which is still going. Um, but but there were different tracks. You can go to medical school and, enroll for 2 years, and then become an apprentice in somebody's practice. That
Yeah.
that was common. Now, that was when we knew a lot less. Today, it's much more sophisticated, there's a lot more to learn, but still, in the United States, you still have to have a bachelor's degree, whereas in a lot of the rest of the world, you don't. In most European countries, and I don't think anybody would say those doctors aren't as knowledgeable as American doctors. Uh, you right out of high school, you decide you want to be a doctor, and you go on a program where it's maybe the whole thing is 6 years. Maybe the first 2 years
Yeah.
are general education, like to get a background, and then but you're focusing right from the get-go on what you wanna do for a living. You're not getting, like a broad liberal arts education, you're getting a focused that's the way it is in a lot of the world, and if we had a free country, we could probably structure there'd probably be a whole lot of different ways you could do it, especially if you didn't have, like, the government saying, "This is what the requirements are," through licensing. There's certainly more than one way to learn how to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, Jeff, one of the things is it seems like maybe in medicine there's always been somewhat of a hostility towards innovation. There was that guy was it in Austria who realized, "Hey, we need to wash our hands."
Yeah, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that was
Yeah,
Semmelweis.
that guy really is a major hero in medicine, but at the time he was, what they did to him was absolutely horrible.
Yeah,
Tell us that story. I
that's
mean,
the way we even saw it during COVID. I think part
yeah,
of it might be human nature also, when a field starts to get sort of an elite and they get very comfortable with what they all kind of have a quote unquote consensus about this is the way we understand things to be. And when somebody from comes along and challenges that, they tend to get dismissed and rebuffed. So Ignaz Semmelweis was a professor at the University of Budapest. He was Hungarian, it's the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And in
yeah,
those days, in the mid 1800s, if you had your child in a hospital, you the go everybody said, "Don't go to the hospital. Whatever you do, don't go to the hospital because you probably aren't gonna come back." There was a huge maternal and infant mortality rate in having children in hospitals. So almost the wealthy especially, they would have it at home, and the doctor would come to the house and a nurse midwife. So, um, he was noticing, that in his hospital in the obstetrics ward, uh, what they would do is a woman would get they didn't know about the germ theory yet. It wasn't
yeah,
accepted until, so they didn't understand why people were getting infected and dying. So a woman would, have what was called childbed fever. The baby would be born, she'd give birth, it would be septic, the baby came out dead, and they get a high fever and they die. And the doctors would then take the woman off to a separate area, perform an autopsy to try to figure out why they died. And he noticed that there were 2 wards in his hospital. One ward where the women who were sick and they died, they were taken off to like a little alcove right nearby. The doctors didn't wear gloves because they didn't believe in germs, and they had white coats, and if there was a clean white coat, that meant the doctor's not experienced. So what you do is after you get the blood and pus on your hands, you wipe it on your coat. And then it's almost like in a butcher shop when a butcher has a lot of blood on his
yeah,
apron, and that signals to the patients that you're experienced, you're doing a lot of work here. So you'd be in a room doing an autopsy, getting all this pus on your hands, and the nurse would say, "Doctor, come quick, Mrs. So and so is about to deliver." And you say, "Okay, I'll be right there." And you wipe your pus off onto your coat, and you go over and you put your hands inside her pelvis and feel around, and you couldn't figure out why. Like later that day, that woman starts getting sick, and then she dies. So he was noticing in the other ward, they didn't do autopsies. It was a separate part, and they had a much lower rate of that happening. In fact, the women who died of sepsis in the other ward were wheeled over to his ward to get the autopsy. So he started thinking maybe it has something to do with that stuff on your hands. And also, you go from one woman to the next without washing your hands. So he insisted that all of his staff wash their hands between every patient. And he even came up with an antiseptic called chlorhexidine, which we use today. It's kind of related to Clorox. And he had them wash with it. And he ended up having the lowest, his hospital had the lowest birth mortality rate in Europe. And then he went and presented at the university in Vienna about this, and he was booed and chastised, and nobody believed him. How dare you? You're telling me, Professor so and so, that I have to put gloves on? What do you think is wrong with my hands? Things like that. It was a very sad story because he got so um, he actually went crazy. He was so frustrated that nobody was taking him seriously that at one point, the story is that he, in front of his students, he said, "I'm telling you, there's something in this pus that's making people sick. Watch, I'll show you." And he drew up some from a recently dead patient, and he injected it into himself in front of them and said, "Now watch what's going to happen to me." And sure enough, he got sick and died. And that was how he met his demise. There was a one guy in the UK named Joseph Lister, who was a very prominent surgeon who attended some of these meetings that he presented at where he was booed and read some of his articles that he published. And he said, that makes sense to me. So he started insisting that everybody in the operating room scrub between each patient, and he developed his own antiseptic that got named Listerine. People probably heard of that after Joseph Lister. It's not the same stuff it was then, but
Yeah,
that's what they called it, and he ended up having the lowest surgical infection and mortality rate in Europe. So, but still, it wasn't until, like, the 1860s that people started
yeah,
accepting that there's things called bacteria. Yeah.
yeah, it's
So
wild, yeah. Well,
yeah.
that how do you spell that other guy's name, by the way? It was
The first one?
the Hungarian, yeah.
Semmelweis, Semmelweis. In fact, the main medical school in Budapest, Hungary today is named after him because, unfortunately, he didn't live to see it, but now he's recognized, and it's called the Semmelweis School of Medicine.
That's wild, yeah, so, yeah, that's just a great story, it's worth telling, but
Well, we
it
see
sure
that
does.
even today, right? When people were saying during the COVID pandemic, wait a minute. So you're saying that we should lock people down when we have a virus transmitted from the upper airway, and that's
Mhm.
somehow going to stop this thing from
Yeah,
spreading? And then they say, "You shut up. What do you know? I'm a professor at same thing, right?" That's a natural tendency. I don't think it's limited to the medical profession. I think it's probably to many of the professions, it's kinda
I'm
human nature.
unfortunately, yeah, that's partially true, so we got so and, even sometimes, chemists would and other people would do things, I mean, Louis Pasteur wasn't a doctor, but he, of course, gave us the rabies vaccine, which,
Right.
I'm a beneficiary of that, so, it's we
Yeah.
never found the dog, so it's,
Hmm.
uh, and I'd do it again, so,
That into this okay, let's if you wanna jump to something, and I know you would relate to this. So
yeah,
let's alright, well, I gotta give a little bit of FDA first, so
yeah,
if you don't mind.
sure, yeah.
Okay, so up until 1938, there was no FDA. Most people don't know that. I have 2 chapters in the book
Yeah.
about this.
It really wasn't until 38 because I know there were, there because there were books like, Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, and all
Right.
these people calling for,
Yeah.
and because, saying food is bad too, I mean,
Right.
we got people, who get arrested for selling raw milk too.
Well, they in 1906, Congress passed because of people like that, the Pure Food and Drug Act. But that was more like a truth in labeling kind of thing,
Okay.
which you made you could argue as a libertarian that if you're, prosecuting fraud,
Yeah,
then that's legitimate function. So, they basically said that we're gonna test your product, your medicines that you sell, and to make sure it has what you say it has in there. And if it doesn't, you're gonna get fined. And if you have something in there that is potentially addictive or something like alcohol is in it or opium is in it, you need to put on a label that it has that. And if you don't, and it has that, then you're gonna get fined. That was the law. Then in 1938, Congress changed that to, and I don't want to. spend too much time. It's in the book. If you're interested, I go into why and all
Yeah.
that. But basically, from this point forward, every new drug that a drug maker wants to bring to market, the Pure Food and Drug Act created the Bureau of Chemistry, which was testing these things to see if they had what they said they had in them. That morphed into the Food and Drug Administration, and
Yep.
from now on, you gotta you gotta show the FDA your data to convince the FDA that it's safe, and if it's not convinced it's safe, then you can't bring it to the market. That's all, and that was that, and it's everything's already on the market is grandfathered, so that's why many people might not know this, but to this day, there are 2 types of insulin, old school regular and NPH insulin, that you could buy over the counter without a prescription, because they were already around. They were developed around the time
Yeah.
of World War I. And aspirin was already around. So I wonder if they would approve aspirin today. Anyway,
Yep.
from that point forward, had to get approval. And then in 1962, with the Kefauver-Harris amendments, they said not only does it have to get approved, but you have to prove to us that it works for whatever you say it works for. It's called efficacy. That added about 7 years onto the approval process, and there's an irony there because once if you're developing a product that says this you have to put on your application, "We developed this product to use to treat condition A." So now you gotta spend 7 years with efficacy studies showing it works, clinical trials, and then once they approve it, as far as the FDA is concerned, you could use it for anything you want, not just for condition A, because you're a clinician, you read the scientific papers, you go to meetings. If you think this might help with something else, use your own judgment. Who are we to tell you? Well, then why did you make me wait 7 years for you to tell me I could use it for A? I could
Yep.
have told you what I think about it for that too. So, and then in 1951, that's how recent, up until 1951, it was up to the pharmaceutical company to decide if they wanted something to be prescription only or over the counter. And so maybe their legal department would say, look, this one's complicated. If people don't use it the way we describe on the label, something bad's going to happen. We're going to get sued. Our reputation is going to be destroyed. So let's stipulate to the pharmacist, you cannot sell this to someone unless they have a prescription from a healthcare practitioner, because that'll take some of the pressure off of us because whoever prescribed it, now they're responsible and they're going to have to kind of keep an eye on how that person's using it. But so it was up to the drug company to decide whether they're going to say we want this to be sold prescription only or over the counter. But in 1951, that was taken away from them and put in the hands of the government again with that Durham Humphrey amendment. Hubert Humphrey, the senator and then vice president, and Carl Durham, both of them were pharmacists before they got into politics, so they had an interest in this. And they said, okay, from this point forward, the FDA is going to decide whether you need a prescription or whether you can get it over the counter, which is why, for example, in this country, women still need a prescription to get birth control pills, whereas in 100 countries, you could just walk in and get them. And the American College of OBGYNs, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Family Physicians have been saying for 20 years, you shouldn't need a prescription for this. You don't need to see me. You can't hurt yourself. You should be able to get it over the counter. So it's not, and to me, that should really be significant because these guys get paid when you come to see them for a prescription. And they're saying you don't need to come see me and get a prescription. Yet the FDA, because once you have a monopoly government with a gun making the decision for everybody, it's unavoidable even that no matter who's in charge, it's gonna be vulnerable to political considerations and special interest pleading and all that. There's no way to avoid that. So that started in 1951. Now today, pharmaceuticals are so much more complicated than they were back then. So if we got rid of that prescription monopoly decision, if took it out of the FDA's hands, it's not like overnight everything becomes over the counter. Probably the great majority is more. I don't think the makers of chemotherapy are gonna be selling it over the counter. But, but a lot of stuff that isn't over the counter, like GLP-1s for, weight loss or birth control pills or naloxone for opioid overdoses, those kind of things, uh, uh, medications to treat UTIs, they'd be over the counter. But right now it's up to the government to decide. So, I had to get into that for the next thing about psychedelics. And again, this gets
Yeah.
back to the reason why I had to give you the FDA thing. So psychedelics, I know you have an interest in this. So there, as listeners of your podcast probably know, almost all psychedelics that people are aware of have been placed on a DEA schedule as Schedule One, which means uh, no currently acceptable medical use and
Yes.
high potential for abuse. And that's kind of in addition to being morally wrong, it also suppressed a lot of clinical research that could be done because if you're a clinical researcher, if you want to do research on a Schedule One drug, you got to jump through all these hoops to get special permission from the cops, the DEA, to be able to do this research. So it's really suppressed research. But outside of the established medical uh, institutions, a lot of research has been done for decades.
Mhm.
I'm sure everybody knows of Rick Doblin, who organized the multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies,
Yes.
and even outside that, there have been people all around the world, many of whom don't have medical degrees, who've been doing a lot of great research with different types of psychedelics. Some completely natural, some derivatives like MDMA and LSD, which are not completely natural, but they are based on naturally occurring products, and finding it has a lot of benefits for a lot of things. Out in addition to being recreationally uh, have recreational value, but they have a lot of therapeutic uses. So Rick Doblin is trying to go about it playing by the rules, and he's been toiling for like 30 or 40 years. He even created a public benefit corporation because most of these things are not patented. They're naturally occurring, or in the case of like ketamine, they've been off patent for years. So there's no financial incentive for a pharmaceutical company to want to do a lot of research on this. So he created a corporation that's not for profit called Lycos, and they started funding these studies, and they went to the FDA and they did these clinical trials, and they did everything, the way the FDA wants it, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, using MDMA to treat PTSD, for example. And even after all that, we thought the FDA was going to say, okay, you can use it. Instead, they said, no, we want some more research because, again, you got a monopoly decision here. But be eh, I would argue that even if they finally said, "Okay, you can use MDMA," well, first of all, that's one of a whole bunch of different drugs.
Mhm.
That's one, just one. But on top of that, they're gonna place a whole bunch of requirements on it, like it's gonna have to be prescription only, it's gonna have to be prescribed by a doctor. And let's take an example. So ketamine, it has some psychedelic qualities. It's been around since the '60s. It's generally used as an anesthetic. So it's an improved drug, and but it's recently we learned that you could use it as a form of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. That's what they call an off-label use because it's approved through that
Yes.
P5 It's approved for use for anesthetic. So you're using it for something it's not approved for. But like I said, the FDA's position is, well, once it's approved for one thing, you could use it for anything you want. So, so you have, but since it could only be administered by a licensed clinician, an MD or a DO, or in some states maybe a nurse practitioner,
Yeah.
um, and so it's the only way you can get it. And then and so you got these people who are giving it. In my city of Phoenix, there's several ketamine clinics, but the people don't know what the heck they're doing because they've never been involved in this stuff. They've never had an interest in it. So I have a friend, a libertarian friend, who uh, it's not covered by insurance because
Yeah.
it's not considered,
Yes.
it's an off-label use. So he spent $3,000. He went to an anesthesiologist who has an office, plugged him into intravenous ketamine,
Mhm.
came back like an hour later, checked his vital signs, watched him for a while, and said, "Okay, you can go now. See you next week. 3 sessions, $3,000." And I said, "So what happened?" He said, "Nothing. I just lost $3,000. I don't notice anything." So you mean he didn't kind of spend time helping you process
Mhm.
what you were experiencing? No, he just had me lay there in a room by myself, and a nurse came in and checked my blood pressure once in a while. That's the problem. So if we go through the normal channels, it's gonna have stuff like that. Like, you're gonna have to, the FDA say, "Fine, you could use MDMA to treat PTSD, but it has to be administered by a licensed physician, and it has to be given in the office, and this and this and this." And what's gonna happen is that the only people that the government is gonna allow to even engaged in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy are the people who know the least about it because they've never been interested in it. They see it as a money-making opportunity, but they've never had an
Yeah.
interest. They don't know what to do. Meanwhile, the people know how to do this. They may not even have science degrees. They could be social workers. They could be psychologists. A lot of psychologists know about this. Or they could be Rick Doblin's degree is in, I think, public administration. So,
Yeah.
so
Like
you
that.
don't have to, but they have an interest and they've been working it and with people and they know how to the nuances of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. They're not going to be allowed to do it anyway. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and I will warn you, most of the people who work for MAPS are not, free market people. They want to see psychedelics legalized, but a lot of them are really very hostile toward capitalisms, but they do see some of the corruptions here. Yeah, I also gotta point out, I've heard very mixed reviews on ketamine, so I do wanna point that out there that sometimes it makes people angrier and stuff like that.
I've
This is
heard
not
mixed
that sort
reviews
of thing.
too.
Yeah. But, Jeff, I did wanna bring up something ask you about something else too, though, with the AMA. The AMA also declared war on what was often called the lodge doctor. People would join, fraternal organizations like
Yeah.
the Eagles or the Moose, and they would actually have an in-house doctor, and this was a way for people to get
Yeah.
pretty cheap medical care. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I kind of alluded to it earlier. They would uh, threaten you with being expelled from the AMA.
Yeah.
If they believed everything has to be fee for service
Mhm.
and you're making it tough on the rest of us, if you agree to, like, if you're a member of the lodge, then part of your membership is you get service from me, which they were doing. I don't my dad belonged to a lodge,
Yeah.
and we had a doctor through that lodge, but,
Mhm.
which of course, in a free society should be able to do that. Now the AMA,
Mhm.
it couldn't ban you from doing that, but it could ban you from the AMA for doing that. They're a private organization, and they could say, "Well, if you wanna be a member of an organization, you have to agree not to do that." And up until I mean, nowadays, only about maybe 10 to 12% of practicing physicians, belong to the AMA anymore. But, uh, but back in the days when the AMA was busy getting licensing and all that done, if you didn't have a membership in the AMA, you could really have a hard time getting ahead because number 1, the AMA, the board licensing board was made up of the AMA, and you didn't
Yeah.
wanna get on the wrong side. So, you kinda want the incentive was for you to play along and be a good boy. So that had a lot to do with that. Kaiser was aluminum company was the one who created what's now Kaiser Permanente. They were started off with company health plan for employees, and, they are because of the work of the AMA and over the years, it's pushing for, restrictions through licensing boards. They are the only vertically integrated private health plan prepaid health plan in the country right now. There's none other that exists. So, with Kaiser, you pay money up front or you could pay a monthly premium, but it covers everything. You go into their clinic and they have, by vertically integrated. I mean, they have all the different specialties. You start off with the primary care. If you need to see a dermatologist, the primary care doctor will send you to a dermatologist down the hall, that kind of thing. And that may not be what you want because they have different incentives. Their incentives are to do fewer things because they get paid once, and the more they do,
Mhm.
the less profit they have. The fee for service, the incentive is to what else could I sell you? I want to do more things. The
True.
more I do, the more I get paid. Um, I think in a free country, you should be able to decide which model you'd like to work with. Well, there could be other models that we don't even know about that are kind of haven't had a chance to exist. I could also get into how wage and price controls and
Yeah.
the tax code had a lot to do with our current
Yeah.
healthcare system.
Yeah. Another thing I want to ask, Jeff, where are some free market havens in healthcare now. I mean, in the world or anywhere. I've heard Singapore is often
That's one of the freer. Yeah,
implemented. Yeah.
yeah. In Singapore,
Are
yeah.
there any places that really have a free market in healthcare anymore? Because we hear so much about socialized medicine, and you hear them also, talk about how proud they are. I'm so proud of the National Health Service and stuff like that.
Well, we have socialized medicine. I've said this many times,
We
before.
we
bef
basically we
we
basically do.
we definitely do. It's just not as coherent as some of the other countries. I've said this in testimony before the Kentucky legislature about 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I said, "Look, if you're 65 or older, you're on the Canadian system. You have a
yeah,
single payer, government-run system called Medicare. The government pays all the bills. There's no you can't not be on Medicare. There's no other the private insurance companies aren't allowed to sell you insurance if you're a 65-year-old individual. If you're getting it through your job, you can keep getting it through your job. But, once you're no longer working, you gotta go on Medicare. There's nothing else. So that's the Canadian system. Now, if you earn, 138% of the poverty level or below, you're on the Canadian system also. It's called Medicaid, so the government is paying all the bills. Then if you're a veteran, you're in the VA system, which is like the National Health Service in the UK, which is, instead of the government being just a payer, the government actually owns the hospitals and employs all the healthcare workers. That's the NHS. Okay, so now we got the poor, low-income people, we got everybody over 65, and we got veterans. Then if you're living on an Indian reservation, you got the Indian Health Service. That's again
yeah,
is like the UK NHS.
yeah,
Alright, so what's left? So now, what about 45% of the population is left, and
yeah,
if you work for an employer who employs 50 or more employees, the government requires them to provide you with health insurance that it designed. It says how much of it can go towards paying
yeah,
benefits, how much towards administrative costs, what must be covered, what et cetera, et cetera. So basically, insurance companies aren't selling insurance. The insurance companies are just managing the funds because insurance is kind of risk rating, like when you insure your car, the insurance company is basing it on the cost of your car, how old you are, your driving record, and they say, "Okay, I'll cover you for this amount based upon your risk." You can't do that in health insurance. The government's already saying you gotta cover everybody, and this is what you could
yeah,
charge. Now, if you're not employed, you don't get employer-provided health insurance, well, then what's that's about 10%, 15% left of the population.
yeah,
They gotta go through a government exchange to get a similarly government-designed healthcare plan that can't charge people based on risk, that has and it's gotta cover things. So if you're a 30-year-old single male, you still have to buy health insurance that covers obstetrics. And if you are, you don't drink, let's say you're a Mormon, you don't drink alcohol, you don't do drugs, you don't smoke, but you still gotta get health insurance that covers drug rehab services because that's what the government decides. So we have socialized medicine,
yeah,
and the government uses a few handful of private insurance companies to kinda manage the money that's flowing through it. And it's just it's like I called it a Frankenstein model because it's
yeah,
all different kind
I
of things patched together. Whereas in most of the other countries, there's just one. Now, Switzerland, Obamacare was based on sort of what they do in Switzerland, but it didn't work out like it did in Switzerland. And actually, it was based on a plan that came out of the Heritage Foundation. So in Switzerland, they have a mandate that everybody must buy bare bones, essential, catastrophic insurance. Not for everyday things, not for wellness exams, not for getting a hernia fixed or deciding you wanna have a child, but for things like big stuff. You get a heart attack, you're in a car accident, you get a cancer. You gotta buy bare
yeah,
bones.
something that might be 2 months of your salary, or
Yeah.
some yeah,
And if you wanna buy more than that, that's your business, but we require everybody to buy bare bones. And they don't have separate Medicare for the seniors and Medicaid for the poor people and VA for the veterans. They just have that. And if you could prove to the government that because of your economic condition, you just can't afford it. So the government will give you a subsidy to help you buy that bare bones thing. You want anything beyond that, that's on you. At least that's simpler, you
I
know?
yeah. I wondered what kind of system Switzerland has just because Switzerland has more or less rejected a lot of the socialism that exists in the
Yeah,
world. We
and
also mentioned
all the
Singapore.
doctors and hospitals, they're all private,
Yeah, all private, yeah.
and so are the insurance companies,
And,
but
you know,
so
and,
they
you know
just kinda have like a safety net, so to speak.
Jeff, it's not unusual, especially to hear about Americans nowadays going to Mexico, for this or that.
Yeah, they pay cash.
They
Cash
pay
is a lot
cash.
cheaper too.
That's the thing. Everything is usually a lot cheaper. The other thing too is a lot of these other places also have price transparency. I mean,
Well, you got examples like that in this country too. The problem is we have a third party payer system, and the
yeah,
tax code has something to do with this also, okay?
yeah,
So, let me get into that a little bit. Now, this isn't in my book, but Michael Cannon has written a lot
yeah,
about this because he's the health economist. So, during World War II, uh, Congress imposed wage and price controls.
yes,
So the only way, and there was a real labor shortage because so many people going into the army to fight in World War II. So the only way you can attract workers, you can't offer them a higher salary than your competitor. So, but you could offer them benefits. So Chrysler, I think, was the first one to do this. Chrysler, they were making tanks in those days too, and they said, we'll give you health insurance if you come work for us." And at the time, Truman was president already, and he liked that idea, so he got Congress first the IRS did it as a executive order, and then it was codified a few years later by Congress that said, "If you're an employer and you provide health insurance to your employee, we're gonna let you deduct that as a business expense, and we're not gonna let the IRS count that as income to the employee." So, in other
yeah,
words, if it gives you life insurance, well,
yeah,
you gotta pay tax on that because that was an in-kind form of
yeah.
compensation. So,
That's pretty well known. Yeah,
so suddenly everybody started wanting it makes sense, but even that discriminates against, people in lower income brackets, right? Because,
yeah,
if you're a wealthy guy, that health insurance benefit is, it could be, you could be in let's say, the 37% tax bracket, so that was a big benefit to you, but if you're in a 10% tax bracket, it's not as good a benefit, and if you don't get it from your job, you gotta pay for it with after-tax dollars, and
yeah,
of course, it created all these other, perverse incentives to think, "Well, since you don't really think you're paying for it, but you really are in it because the cost of labor is the whole nut, so whatever you're getting as a health insurance benefit you might otherwise have gotten a salary, except now your boss is kinda picking what the plan is for you instead of you, and, um, and you kinda think that you're not paying for healthcare, so you wanna use it as much as possible and also t tell your boss you want as many things covered as possible because you don't wanna pay for what otherwise and that's what created a lot of this spiral also.
yeah.
So, I mean,
Exactly.
like I said, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and that's what's so. I mean, insurance is. I don't have car insurance to get my oil changed. That's
Right.
not a catastrophic expense. I mean, I have a. I mean, it's so ridiculous that
Or
healthcare
new
is.
tires. Let's go with new tires. Could
Yeah,
you imagine how much tires and oil changes would cost if
yeah.
Congress mandated that all auto insurance has gotta cover oil
Oh
changes,
God, I know.
tune-ups, and tire
Yeah,
rotations?
yeah. Not to mention, Jeff, and granted, you can't quite do this, but I can remember having accidents, and I would go into some office at State Farm, and they would say, this, and they would hand me a check, and they would say, "You go get it taken care of." So I had an incentive to find somebody who would do a good job, but also do it at a reasonable price, and a lot of times
Right.
I've come out ahead. It's not. I mean, it's definitely better. Whereas you have these situations where they bill the insurance company, and part of the problem with American healthcare too is a lot of people go into something thinking that their insurance is going to cover it, and then a month later, oh, we got this bill. Well, I thought that was going to be covered, and maybe they wouldn't have done this if they don't. I
Well,
mean,
I've been in practice long enough to remember. I've been in practice
yeah,
I started my practice in '81. There were a lot of people then who
yeah,
had the kind of insurance for healthcare you just described with your car,
yeah,
where people come to me, and I didn't have to deal with their insurance company. They check with their insurance company. I just they took a copy of my bill and they submitted it and got reimbursed by their insurance. It was not my
yeah,
business, except I'll help them out by giving them an itemized statement they could submit to their insurance. And the behavior was completely different. But look, here's an example, things that insurance doesn't cover: cosmetic surgery, most cases LASIK eye surgery. Like every other field that we ever
Yes.
deal with, it's gotten cheaper over time,
Yeah,
not
like
more
yeah.
expensive, right?
I
C
mean, yeah,
when LASIK
let's talk about LASIK because that's something that's never
yeah,
been part of this system. It's been
mhm,
outside the system and it's gotten cheaper. It's gotten
right.
better
Just like computers have and everything.
because
Everything's
it's
gotten
not paid
cheaper
by
with time, not
insurance.
more
It's not
expensive.
mandated by the government
Right.
it's gotten better. It's
Right,
so
and you but
yeah,
with cosmetic surgery, you hear this story about surprise billing, like your health plan says you need to have your surgery at this hospital and use these doctors, and then all of a sudden you get this bill from somebody who was called in on your case that's not in network, so insurance is gonna cover it, and now you get the surprise bill that you weren't anticipating. Well, that never happens when you're dealing in a marketplace, so
yeah,
when you go to a cosmetic surgeon, let's say they're gonna do, a breast, job, mammoplasty. They quote you, okay, this is the one total bill. It covers the implant, it covers the surgery, it covers the anesthesiologist, and it covers uh, the antibiotics we give you, and it covers the facility we use. One complete package. You pay me, and I've already pre negotiated with the other subcontractors, and I pay them. That's how it works. You won't get a surprise bill. It's just like, so again, a lot of this is all created by these government interventions.
yeah, there's all these interventions. And I do want to ask too, when was there when did any pushback come out against this? I mean, I know about there's the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons. When did people start to realize we need a free market in healthcare?
Unfortunately, the AAPS that you just mentioned is a very small is a minority.
Yeah,
They've been devoted to free markets in healthcare and health freedom in general. I mean, they've been pretty libertarian. I noticed a lot when I publish stuff, even if it has to do with ending the drug war and things like that, they retweet it for me. So they're pretty libertarian. But the AMA derives most of its income from the monopoly Congress granted it for developing every year the codes for all the procedures that hospitals and doctors bill for, called procedure codes. The CPT is called. They got a monopoly granted on that. They actually are beholden to the government. That's why so few doctors belong to them, because if you're not fighting for me, you're compromised. So
yeah,
and there are no real there are here and there these small organizations, doctors for patient care or something like that, but for the most part, there are no medical, groups that are advocating for free markets, and a lot of doctors, and I'm not saying this to be critical, I mean, you know, to be good at what you do requires a lot of focus on your field,
yeah,
not everybody is like me where they could be a surgeon and a fellow at a think tank. Most people are not don't have those kind of interests. So when you hear the doctors griping, they're never thinking about the government put me in this predicament. They're thinking about we got to get the government to pay us better or to give us a better deal. And a lot of these doctors who, you hear saying I'm for free markets in healthcare, if if a different healthcare profession wants to expand their scope of practice, boy, they fight tooth and nail to prevent it. So, for example, and this is in chapter 2, psychologists, okay? Many people might not know about this, but to be a clinical psychologist in United States, every state pretty much has similar rules. You have to have either a PhD or PsyD. It's a doctorate level degree in clinical psychology. It's about the same length of time or longer as going to med school. And then you got to do a 1-year postdoctoral internship. And then you can get a license to be a clinical psychologist. Now, if you see a clinical psychologist for a mental health problem, and of course they do talk therapy. And there are various modalities. There's CBT. There's dialectical, whatever, behavioral therapy. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't do. So I don't. But that they focus on things where they're interacting directly with the patient. Psychiatrists over the years have evolved to basically being psychopharmacologists. They just write prescriptions. In fact, surveys showed a recent survey published in the Journal of the American Medical Association showed that only about 11% even engage in what they call talk therapy. So they talk to you for 15, 20 minutes and they write your prescription, and then you come back and you say, well, I'm getting this and this symptom. Okay, well, let me give you another thing to take on top of that, et cetera, et cetera. So now, and 50% of them don't take insurance. So you go into a psychologist, let's say you got severe clinical depression, the psychologist is working with you, but you're so depressed that you're having trouble making any sort of progress. And the psychologist says, we got to get you on some antidepressant just to kind of take some of these more severe symptoms away so that we could make progress. But I'm not allowed to prescribe anything for you. So let me send you to a psychiatrist to prescribe it. So they got two doctors. But like I say, they don't, 50% don't take insurance. You got to go to this doctor. They're going to charge you $300 and a prescription. And understandably, they're going to want to see you regularly to monitor the medicine because they're responsible. So, or you can go to any licensed doctor. You can call me up. I'm a surgeon. I don't know the first thing about psychiatric meds, but I'm licensed to practice medicine, so I could legally prescribe it. If you just tell me what you need, and a dose, you theoretically, I could do it for you. I'm saying if you're a psychologist. So starting in the 1990s, a field called prescribing psychotherapists developed, where psychologists who are interested in this do an extra 2 years. They get a master's of science in clinical psychopharmacology. So they're learning all about, the biochemistry, the pharmacology, same thing that the psychiatrists know. And then they do like a 2 year where they're practicing prescribing medicines only for psychology for their psych patients under the supervision of a psychiatrist. And then after a couple of years, they're given a green light and they can practice just like the psychiatrist, which obviously is expanding the options to patients of where they can get psych meds and reducing the number of doctors and expense that they have to go through. So this has been around since 1990s. Uh, there are these prescribing psychotherapists in the Public Health Service Commission Corps, in the military, uh, in the Navy, and in 7 states now. 7 states. But a group tried to introduce it here in Arizona last year. I testified in support of the idea, and the Arizona Medical Association and the Arizona Psychiatric Association fought tooth and nail and persuaded the state lawmakers not to pass it, saying, "Of course, we're only thinking about the safety of the patient. We're not thinking about anything else." So there's an example where, again, the licensing thing, you have these entrenched incumbents who, with the advances we've had in medical science today, you would think that there are a whole lot of people who maybe 50 years ago couldn't do what they could do now, but now they're trained to do it, and they could be providing a service that you're paying a lot of money for to have an MD do, who might be overqualified for this. And there's a person who doesn't have the years of training, but who could do that real well, and you're not allowed to access that person. So that again, this is all contributing to the cost problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing, America is truly remarkable in the sense that it's a country that pays for so much and yet gets so little, and we can apply that to healthcare and we can apply that to the schools. Are there any other places that you'd call free market havens in healthcare? Are they just places where everything's too backward to notice? I mean, I do think Mexico might be a haven for this, but is there any place else where you I know Americans who've actually went to Mexico because of healthcare.
They're going to Thailand, they're going to India. There's a lot of what they call medical tourism. And there's, offshore, you're probably familiar with, I'm blanking on the name now. There's this island off the coast of Honduras that's being developed as a free market
Prospera, yeah,
Prospera. People are going to be able to go there to get
yeah.
healthcare.
Well, I
But
I
I
I
was going
I
to say,
also suggested that when I was at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, I said, "Have you thought about maybe trying to make New Hampshire a haven for free markets and healthcare?" As to the ext I don't know how much they could do it, but maybe
problem
they
is you got to fight with the state legislature,
yeah.
and
Well,
you got the
yes,
licensing and all that other stuff.
if you're familiar with what the Free State Project is, that's what they're
Yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
right now they don't have enough. So
Jeff, is it fair to say, though, that really doctors also were the opened up the whole Pandora's box of occupational licensing? Because You
Yeah,
mentioned that there was
yeah,
that this whole concept of licensing didn't exist, and now, I personally know the lady who lobbied the Texas legislature to get licensing on massage therapists and,
well,
oh,
yeah,
licensed
yeah.
cosmetologists.
Well, yeah, I mean, for
Really
some of these things,
that there's no reason for.
yeah, for some of these things, like, not just the medical fields, but, occupations in
I'm
general,
a licensed interior decorator. I
they
mean,
got that. They
oh,
got that, yeah. As you know, in some cases, to be like a licensed cosmetologist, you need to take more hours of training than to be an EMT tech, that
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
so
So,
I don't I almost think really we just have to, fight back and really just really fight the whole scam of licensing in general. It
absolutely, we've done a lot of work on that at the Cato Institute, and what I'm, and I like I say, I spend a lot of time on that in my book. To be fair, most of my peers, the doctors my age or younger, they have no idea of, even I didn't until I started studying this. When I was a pre-med student in undergrad, I just knew, okay, you gotta go to medical school and then you gotta get a license. It wasn't like I didn't know that this whole situation was the result of lobbying by my professional ancestors 100 years earlier. Most people aren't aware of this. They just said, "This is the system we're in," and so I don't wanna blame the current doctors for this, but their representative organizations, like the state chapters of the medical association, still fight very hard to preserve this because it's protectionist. It's keeping them, where they wanna be. Here's another example, telemedicine, okay?
yeah,
So, again, I think technology is gonna really be the thing that does in licensing. So, already we learned, especially during the pandemic, you can do a lot of things with telemedicine. In some fields like psychotherapy or that kind of thing, it's easy obviously you could do it telemedicine. You don't have to even physically examine someone. But a lot of things you do telemedicine. Well, in most states, if you let's say you live in, Nevada, rural Nevada, and you wanna get medical advice from this renowned expert in Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital, because you got a very unique condition, and you don't wanna fly all the way to Boston to talk to the guy, you wanna do it over like this. Well, he or she is not allowed to give you that advice unless
yeah,
they get a license to practice medicine in the state of Nevada, okay? Because it's practicing across state
yeah,
lines. Now, Arizona, to its credit, became after the pandemic, our governor at the time, Governor Ducey, was really good on the light. He got the whole story. He's a businessman. He was the one who founded Cold Stone ice cream thing. So he understood the licensing thing,
mhm,
and they did a lot of licensing reform when he was the governor, and one of them was, if you have a license in good standing in any of the health fields, psychology, medicine, physical therapy, whatever, dentistry, in any of the 50 states, then you could provide telehealth services to people in Arizona without having to get an Arizona license. This is the only state where that is. Um, since that time, a couple of other states have passed similar things, but not as as comprehensive as Arizona's. But otherwise, there's the licensing law is again standing in the way of this
mm,
technology that's getting underused. And then what's really gonna do them in is AI, because
yeah,
we're starting to see now, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners have experience with this, and there've been studies done on this. You could use, like, ChatGPT or one of these, AI platforms, and I've done this myself. I've entered in medical lease, for myself when I've had a certain medical, like I injured myself or whatever, I go into ChatGPT and I describe in medical terms like I'd be talking to another doctor. I had this and this and this and this and this. I did this test that showed this and this and this. What Give me a list of what it could be. Spits out a list as good as any, maybe even better than a lot of doctors can, because it might not some doctors might not have thought of that one for the list. They may have left that one off. So what's gonna start happening, and is already happening, is AI. People are gonna be able to get an
yeah,
app, and that's gonna replace a lot of the need to go to a doctor. Now, the AI still can't yet do an operation on you, but for a lot of everyday things, you won't need to go to a doctor. Okay, so how's that gonna work? If the company that made the AI is, let's say, based in the Silicon Valley and you're in Tennessee, does are you not allowed to use the AI because it doesn't have a license to practice medicine in Tennessee? See what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
gonna create a whole lot of problems, which I think are gonna make licensing become very obsolete. It's just gonna be that is so 20th century, and
Well
it's gonna make them disappear.
well, what even stops somebody from doing what even stops somebody from going into Mexico and saying, "I'm gonna do telemedicine and sell it to Americans?" That's, and there's nothing really theoretically they can do because he's in Mexico. I mean, I guess they could try to extradite somebody for that, but I don't know if that
Or maybe Trump could put tariffs on people who use
yeah,
it or something.
and this is and this is another reason, to remember the importance of open borders. I live 250 miles from Mexico. There are people, for example, who will go down to Mexico to get root canals or get dental work or things like this, and they get it because it's cheap,
Mhm.
and the quality of care is just as good, if not better. Yeah, one thing that's also kind of interesting in some foreign countries too. It's a lot easier to talk to a doctor. I
Well,
mean,
when
an
wh
actual
wh
doctor. It's
well
hard to talk to a doctor in America.
because the doctor you're talking to there,
Yeah,
you're paying for their time.
yeah,
And
but
whereas the
but
doctor here, you gotta see him because he's the doctor in
yeah.
the plan that you have to see.
Yeah, yeah, it's so,
Yeah.
and, Jeff, one else thing too, I used to have a really amazing chiropractor. What can you say about chiropractic? Because
I don't know a lot about it.
it's kind of been outside of medicine, but this
Yeah.
guy did really good work, and he was licensed too,
They
and
didn't
also
used to be. They didn't used to be either. I think, now I don't know whether it was a chicken or the egg thing. It could have I'm not sure. It could be the story like with the podiatrist where they needed to get licensed so they wouldn't be accused of practicing without a license, or it could be they wanted to emulate what the doctors did.
yeah,
It's hard to know which one it was. By the way, are you located in Texas?
yes,
Okay, so there is a free market option in Oklahoma City. Do you know about
yeah,
that?
yeah, I know, I've heard of that place, yeah, where
Yeah.
you get some price transparency, yeah,
Well, yeah, it's called the Surgery Center of Oklahoma City. It was founded by a libertarian.
that's 400 miles,
I
but yeah.
Yeah, well, they have their own
Texas is
center.
closer for me, but yes. Or
Yeah,
Mexico is closer for me, but yes.
you know that old joke about the Texan and the guy from Maine having a conversation, and the Texan says to the guy from Maine, I live in Texas. I could get in my car and drive across and drive for 8 hours and still not be outside of Texas."
Yes.
And the guy from Maine said, "Yeah, I had a car that was that bad too once." So so anyway, that's a
Yeah.
joke.
Anyway,
S
so
but Keith Smith created the Surgery Center of Oklahoma City. I think he's an ANCAP
yeah.
libertarian, and, they have a staff of different all the surgical
Mhm.
specialties, and they do a global thing like the cosmetic surgeons do. So there's a drop-down menu. People should go surgerycenterok.com is what it's
Mhm.
called,
Yeah.
and there's a drop-down menu, whatever procedure, it gives you the price, which is a fraction of what it otherwise costs, and it includes everything: anesthesia, the surgery, whatever implant needs to be put in you or whatever, the facility charge, and, they don't take insurance. And, it's so much cheaper that
Mhm.
companies that are self-insured have been flying people from, like, Seattle, Washington, down to Surgery Center of Oklahoma City, get their operation, and come
Yeah.
back, and the employers paid for that because it's still cheaper than if they went the standard route. So,
Yeah.
that's something you could people could, and I know Keith Smith has been traveling around the country, trying to help s doctors in other states try to set up similar kind of, projects. So that's at least something to look into.
Yeah, also, Jeff, I know for a long time the AMA has also had a war on midwives. What can you tell me about that? Because
Well,
midwifery has been around forever.
midwifery is around before there were OBGYNs, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, again, I don't I can't get into specifics, but it all boils down to, um, protectionism. It's turf
Yeah,
battles. We don't, and they'll never say that.
yeah,
Like I say, in the earlier days, the AMA was explicit. They would say, "We need to reduce the number of doctors because we're not making enough money." Now they
yes,
wouldn't talk like that. Instead, they'll say, "We're only concerned about this health and safety of the patients, and we don't think it's safe for them to, uh, have a midwife do the delivery, let's say. They're doing it only for altruistic reasons. And I talk about that kinda practice in my book, and I say, "Look, the fact is, if you believe that we're a free country, where we're all autonomous adults, then even if you honestly think that I'm making a big mistake contracting with a midwife to deliver my baby, and I should be going to a board certified obstetrician, and you may be right, but
Yeah,
you know what? It's my decision. That's all. And that's the
exactly,
way we
yeah.
gotta be."
And, I there's al that's always been the claim. I do think we might hear, some nonsense about, "Well, we gotta protect children," there but who knows? But, and I wonder also if maybe people are finally starting to see through the lie of licensing. I think
What I've noticed as working at a think tank,
Yeah,
as you know, we're non-intention and purposely nonpartisan. And, and we're not allowed to lobby, so because we're nonprofit. So, but, when we testify, we could say, we can't say vote yes on bill number or whatever, but we could say this bill has some very good features that would do this, or we could say this bill has some worrisome things in it, and it's not a good idea. You could say it that way. But anyway, with new kind of coalitions are forming. The country's obviously in the middle of a realignment politically right now. We see that with the rise of protectionism and nativism on the right, and meanwhile on the left, uh, when I get involved testifying on licensing law issues and scope of practice issues, more often than not, the people on the left are on the same side of that issue with us. Now they may be coming at it from a different angle. We're coming at
yeah,
it from the government doesn't have a right to stop somebody from making an honest living. They m be m have coming at it more from, the licensing laws are preventing people who are in low income and
yeah,
marginalized groups from advancing because it's locking them out. As long as we both wanna get to the same place, you could have your own reasons, it's okay with me, but we're starting to see that, so, there's a growing movement just like with, NIMBYism and zoning laws.
yeah,
You're seeing more and more people who identify with the progressives and on the left who are allying with people who are like libertarians on things like, zoning and land use
yeah.
restrictions and definitely on licensing laws. I've in fact, numerous occasions when I've testified at the state legislature on some licensing or scope of practice issue, somebody representing one of the left-wing organizations has been there to testify too, and has been on the same side of the issue as me.
I'm not really all that surprised that that's coming from the left either, Jeff, because I think there are some people on the left who really do. They want things to be more accessible to poor people, and
Yeah.
they understand that this is a barrier, and most of them just say, "Well, we'll make it free," but then there's this small minority says, "Okay, why is this expensive? How can we make it cheaper?" As an aside, I remember when I lived in Columbus, there was one doctor, it was Doctor, who who, uh, who just operated on his own, only took cash, but you could go see a doctor for, like, 30 bucks. And also he was purely a one-man show. So if you were in middle of an appointment, he might very well answer the phone.
Well,
Not
we're
to
seeing a
Plus, on
rise
the
of
thing too, Jeff, he had a phone from the 1940s. I mean, it was a black
rotator. Yeah.
rotary with some old handle. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was just so wild, but
Well, but you're seeing now a
this was a way to see a
growing,
doctor. This was a cheap way to see a doctor, and he gave me a prescription that was he gave me 3 weeks of prescription samples that were probably worth more than what the appointment had cost.
well, but you're seeing a growing, movement called direct patient care now,
Yeah,
direct care, where
yeah,
doctors are working cash only,
yeah,
and you can maybe get a retainer. We're starting to see that where they don't take insurance. That's usually in primary care, but
yeah,
even in my practice, we've since we opened in 40 plus years ago, we
yeah.
will take patients without insurance, and we'll negotiate a price.
Well,
Eh
just look at how much expenses you take on when you hire one person.
Yeah,
You
you
might
gotta
need
hide.
that person, but
Yeah,
suddenly, bang, you're now going to have to you're 'cause, I mean, that was one thing. I had that great chiropractor. He was all one man by himself. He answered his phone. Every other time I go see a chiropractor, the first thing they have is they have some receptionist, and they're n and none of them have been as good. And I have to admit, it is frustrating because once I found a really good chiropractor, I'm thinking like, every other chiropractor is just crap to me now. And I would just say, "Well, that's not like Steve." I even went so far as to try to contact his school, his chiropractic school, said, "Hey, I had this really great chiropractor, and he came from your school. Can you make a recommendation?" No, they couldn't help, which
right.
but, this is something else too, though. I think some industries have protected themselves by giving out certifications or, auto mechanics have the ASE certified, and I
Yeah,
hope
but
more
as
cert
long as they're not government, most
Yeah,
of these,
yeah,
uh, have grown up organically, and many people might not know this, but there's not even a monopoly of medical certifying boards. There
yeah.
are the biggest one, is the American Board of Medical Specialists, ABMS. And that's the umbrella organization that has the American Board of Surgery, the American Board of Internal Medicine, American Board of Cardiology, etcetera. But that's one. There are 4 other competing certification organizations. It's just that BMS is the biggest. They have about 70% market share. So if a hospital require, by the way, you don't have to be certified to practice medicine. You just have to graduate from an accredited medical
Yeah,
school and do at least 1 year of a postgraduate residency program. The residency programs average 3 to 5 years. So once you get after I finished my first year of my 5-year surgery residency, I got my license, and that
yeah,
allowed me to go moonlight in urgent cares on the side. But, to be certified now some hospitals, and we've seen this more and more, it depends on where the hospital is, if an underserved area, they need doctors more. But otherwise, they'll say, "We're not gonna let you come on our staff as a surgeon unless you're board certified." But you could say, "Okay, then I'm certified by the American Board of Surgery," or you could there are about 3 different certification organizations that certify plastic surgeons. I know there are at least 2 that certify spinal surgeons, so it's not a monopoly,
oh,
and
yeah.
in fact, it's good they're competing with each other also for reputation. I think there's a market for information. I mean, whether you're buying a car or an operation or a computer, you need information, and so there's a market for institutions that vet that do the vetting for you,
Oh, yeah,
and then they will only succeed if they're really good at it, and so if they're not good at it, or if they get co-opted by the people they're certifying, then their competitor's gonna,
yeah.
call them out on it. So I think that's what we don't need licensing boards. In fact, Milton Friedman said this, what, it was 1960 with Capitalism and Freedom. He said, "You don't need a licensing board to license doctors." But that's what certification organizations are all about.
Well,
If the guy says he's a doctor, you don't wanna you check him out, see if he's certified.
and now you have Yelp and all this other stuff. Jeff, I can tell you, the another thing about certifications is there are no artificial barriers to certifications. I called up this computer shop years ago, uh, and the guys and a little girl answered the phone, and he said, "Oh, yeah, talk," and she says, "I gave her phone to that," and I said, "Was that your little girl answered the phone?" He said, "Yeah," and then he told me, I think she was 10 years old, and yeah, and, she went and she passed the test, and she is certified to work on Packard Bells. So she's
That's the
certified
great thing about
service
that,
on a
right?
she's a 10-year-old who is certified to do warranty service on this brand of computer, and I just thought, "That's really cool." Because
Yeah.
you know, eh 'cause another thing about, if you just pass the test, money should not be a barrier, and age really shouldn't be a barrier either. Not that
Experience should be.
she can do the
So,
work,
yeah, if we had licensing boards out of the way, for example, I have a physician
but
assistant
now yeah,
working in my office, PA, and which is like a master's degree level, okay?
yeah,
He's been working in my practice for 20 some odd years, and I have no doubt because we worked on so many surgeries together, on a routine operation like, a hernia operation or a vasectomy or something like that, he could probably do just as well as any
yeah,
surgeon. So if we didn't have the licensing boards in a way, I could envision where the American Board of Surgery, which certifies surgeons, might have a separate category, like,
Yeah,
well, we could certify you to do hernia operations.
yeah,
Only for that. We're not gonna certify you to do colon resections and, thyroid operations, but we could certify you to as far as we're concerned, we'll stipulate you are qualified to do that operation. And you could open up a little practice doing nothing but that. I mean, these are
yeah,
all sorts of we can't even of course, those of us who appreciate markets understand there's no way to even predict what kind of different combinations and opportunities would be there were it not for these obstructions.
yeah. Jeff, I don't want to go much longer on this. But let's imagine Trump calls you up and Trump says, Jeff Singer, you're going to be dictator of American healthcare, and you can do whatever you want to fix this system. What's the first thing? What would you do on day one?
Ooh, there's so many things to do. I think maybe the first thing I do on day 1 is well, I can't do anything about licensing laws because those are state level. The federal government has a s
Yeah, okay,
so
yeah,
on the
maybe
federal
this is
level,
with feds can overrule licensing laws, but yes, I
uh,
mean, you're dictator. Yeah,
well, I probably then
yeah,
would, eliminate Obamacare
yeah,
and get rid of the, tax exclusion for employer-provided insurance
yeah.
and eliminate all federal mandates on what health insurance
Oh, yeah,
must cover and let everybody work it out. That would probably where I start with there. But I also gotta get rid of the FDA. We don't need an FDA, so I get rid of that. Now, if I was dictator, if
yeah,
I was a politician, there's no way you're gonna be able to do these kind of things because it's too radical. You'd have to come up
yeah.
with incremental things that move in that direction.
I just thought of some other thing. We haven't even talked about certificate of need, and
Oh, yeah.
we haven't talked about EMTALA either. 2 amazing disasters.
Yeah, I could talk about certificate of need.
Yeah.
Uh,
You know
uh
what EMTALA is too, right?
Yeah, I wrote a piece about that
Oh, yeah,
years ago. Chapter 3 deals with certificate of need laws,
yeah,
and that historically, that started back in the '70s when Medicare and Medicaid was starting to really kick in and cost a lot of money. So some geniuses figured, if we can get and at that time, the way it worked was, just you go to a doctor, whatever he wants to do, just have him do whatever he wants to do and send us the bill, and we'll pay it, no questions asked. So doctors went from the Buick was the doctor's car when I was a kid. By the time I was out of medical school, the Mercedes was the doctor's car. Because you're saying, wait, you mean
yeah,
I could do anything and I could send you a bill for any amount and you'll just pay it? Okay. And uh and the patients say, and you'll just pay it and I'll pay like next to nothing. Fine. So if the doctor says, while you're here, you want this, this, and this done, I'll say, sure, throw it on the bill. So that's what was happening. So it's getting very costly. So they came up with this idea if we can not allow for more services to develop, then we could save money. Because it's like a reverse of
yeah,
the law of supply. If we could reduce supply, then we will save money because we'll reduce demand.
yeah,
Okay? So they it passed a bill in 1974 that gave grants to states to set up certificate of need commissions. So depending on the state, depending on how many things you require a certificate of need for. For example, in most states, if you wanted to get a new CAT scan machine for your little center, medical center, you had to get a committee to meet and you had to convince them that the state needed the whole state needed one more CAT scanner in this part of the state, or if
yeah,
you wanted to add a wing on of beds onto your hospital or whatever. So it didn't work, and by the mid '80s, Congress repealed it. And the reason it didn't work is they didn't keep in mind that there's a third party payer system. So normally, if you restrict supply without restricting demand, the price goes up, which might feed back and make demand go down. But when the consumer is effectively not paying for it, then they're
yeah,
insulated from price. So they don't care. So it did nothing to restrict costs, the
yeah,
payments. So they repealed it. And by 1990, about 7 states said, okay, we're dropping the certificate of need laws. Arizona was one of them. So did California.
yeah. I don't believe
Um,
Texas has them at all, so
I don't think so either.
yeah,
Uh,
there's
but
still about half the states there.
35 states still have it.
Yeah, and this was something that happened under Nixon, by the way, that
Yeah,
so-called conservative.
right.
Uh, and there's always I think induced demand is one of the most idiotic beliefs anything, 'cause I always hear that, when people talk about, "Well, if we have twice as many highways, I'm gonna go to the grocery store twice as much." No, I'm not. you know
Yeah, but you got this situation where in states like Kentucky's among the worst. They got
Yeah.
certificate need for everything. So if you wanna open up an ambulatory surgery center, the outpatient surgery center, which
Oh, yeah.
nowadays they're much cheaper and more cost effective than doing it at the hospital.
Yeah.
And, so if you're looking at the cost to the whole system, they're more cost effective, okay? But, if you let's say you wanna open up an ambulatory surgery center, you gotta get a certificate of need, and you're competing your competitors, which are the hospitals that have outpatient surgery wings and other ambulatory surgery centers, are gonna say, "No, we don't need another one." So, it's what they call, uh Christina Sandifer, who is at the Goldwater Institute, referred to the certificate of need as the competitor's veto.
Yeah.
And again, so, I mean, I in my book, I have a
Yeah.
scenario of imagine if we had certificate of need laws for restaurants.
Oh
And
gosh, yeah.
and you had this great new idea, new concept, some fusion, Mexican, Asian fusion, and you got this
Yep.
a new concept, but you can't open a restaurant unless you get a certificate of need, and the commission is dominated by all them big
Well,
restaurant chains in your
yeah.
state, and they say, "Nah, that wouldn't fly, so we're not gonna approve it." That's what
Yeah.
happens in healthcare. Now on EMTALA was passed in the '80s also in Reagan administration.
Yes, Reagan, yeah.
Yeah. Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. I think it was 1986.
Yeah.
And I had an article about this that was in Cato's Regulation magazine about 10 years ago. Uh, but I also wrote a piece, I think, for Reason magazine about it also. So again, like a lot of things that happen, uh, Congress steps in to fix a problem after the civil society and the existing tort laws, et cetera, already took care of it,
Yep.
right? So the story behind that was, I think it was in the Chicago area that there were a couple of cases where women in labor, uh, they showed up at a hospital and they didn't have any insurance. Now, when I was in my residency and training, at the county hospital in Phoenix. Arizona was the only state that didn't enroll in Medicaid. We didn't have Medicaid in Arizona until 1982. So up even in my first year in private practice, we didn't have Medicaid. We had indigent hospitals, and you would transfer your patient to the indigent hospital if need be, unless it was not safe to do so. So there were a couple of instances where women were being transferred into the county hospital, Cook County Hospital, because they didn't have insurance and they shouldn't have been transferred. And, they went into labor in the middle of transfer, and there were some horrible outcomes. Either the mother died or the baby died. There are a few instances, but legally, if you're a doctor at hospital B and you get a call from the doctor at hospital A saying, "I wanna transfer a patient over to you," this is legally, it has nothing to do with I'm not talking about law, I'm talking about liability law-wise, you know, tort law. If a doctor says, could you accept my patient and transfer?" I gotta say, "Okay, tell me all about this, I need to know." And when they tell me all about it, I'm gonna ask questions because I wanna know if this patient's stable. I don't want this patient to show up and I gotta do cardio I gotta do, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. I want 'em to know they're safe. So if they describe the situation to me and I make a decision, "You know what? No, I'm not gonna accept that transfer. That patient's not safe. Don't put that patient on an ambulance," okay? So and besides that, if the doctor says, "Well, I don't care, I'm sending him to you anyway," well, now that doctor is obviously liable. So in these instances, that's exactly what happened, and the families sued, and they got compensated appropriately in the tort system, and the hospitals at which were involved in that really tightened up their transfer rules. They said, "Okay, new rule. If you wanna transfer somebody, you gotta talk to the guy, you gotta make sure," and, because the hospitals got sued too. So they were insisting that if we're gonna accept transfers, then you doctors who are doing the transferring, you gotta meet these criteria. So the problem already took care of itself, but there were high profile cases, so Congress had to pass a law, and they said you're not allowed to transfer somebody to another hospital if it's because they don't have insurance. You can only transfer them if it's a
Yeah.
service that they have a service that they need that's not available at your hospital. So, for example, if you show up at a little community hospital and you got a subdural hematoma and you need to go to a neurosurgeon and there's no neurosurgery services at this hospital, they could transfer you to the big medical center where there's neurosurgery could take care of you. But that's the reason to do it. They can't do it because you don't have any insurance and they want to send you to the indigent care facility that's there for you. So that was passed in the 80s, and, and of course, then Medicaid came around, and it kinda made it, in a way, unnecessary because,
Yeah,
uh, why because Medicaid was is paying the hospitals, um, you know, wherever you go, so they would just enroll you on Medicaid, and and, uh, and then even though you didn't have insurance, the state would pay for it. But, I had written articles because uh, during the debate over Obamacare, where Obamacare was going to mandate that states had to have expand their Medicaid. You may remember it was going to expand Medicaid. That's the only part of the Affordable Care Act that was thrown out as unconstitutional because they said the federal government cannot commandeer the state and order them to expand their Medicaid. It was the original part of the bill. And in fact, my article that I wrote about this was cited in an amicus brief on behalf of the states who were fighting it. And so I said, because of EMTALA, let's say you want to this if you want to go back to the pre-Medicaid days, like I'm very unique. I went I practiced in a state, the only state that didn't have Medicaid for a few years. So I got to see what the world before Medicare was like. And the world before Medicare was like, you had the big, busy county hospital that I was training at. Maricopa County was like Cook County or LA County. And you would have our attendings mostly. These are private practice professors who come over and teach us. And they call us and say, I got this young fella here in the emergency room at Fancy Schmancy Scottsdale Hospital, and he needs to have his gallbladder out, and I've already seen him, and he's my one of my professors, and so I've already approved it. I've done all the diagnostic workup, but he doesn't have any insurance, so I'm gonna send him over to you to take care of it there. And, of course, I'm a resident, so I'm all excited about getting another I'm learning, so I'd say, "Great, thank you," and then I go to the emergency room and say, "This guy's gonna be coming over, call me as soon as he gets here because I gotta take care of him." That's how it was. But nowadays, you couldn't even do that. So if a state decided to wanna opt out of the Medicaid system, let's just say, "We're tired of all these rules, we're out. We don't want" 'cause it's a federal state cooperation, Medicaid, part federal funding, part state funding. So let's just say the state says, there are too many strings attached from the federal government. We don't want to do Medicaid anymore. We want to go back to the way it was before Medicaid. Well, we can't because of EMTALA. See? So
yeah.
before EMTALA, we were able to transfer a person to the place that was created for them, this county hospital that was created to take care of people who didn't have the ability to pay. But now you can't even do that because EMTALA won't let you transfer them for that reason. You have to have a different reason. So you're stuck with Medicaid. And ironically, the people who are coming into that county hospital, the county hospital is getting paid now out of Medicaid. So that's the EMTALA story. That's sort of really kinda esoteric.
Well, you
Not one of the big things that we gotta deal with right now.
yeah,
It's
well,
much bigger fish to fry.
you have homeless people and people who don't have primary care physicians who use the emergency room as their doctor, and that's not a wise thing.
Right.
And of course, that's another thing too. You hear everybody now bitch about immigrants. Of course they'll bitch about immigrants no matter what. But immigrants are not looking at the regulation, but just bitching about immigrants.
Actually, most of the immigrants, they tend to avoid emergency rooms and hospitals unless they're
Okay,
really sick
okay.
because they're afraid they're going to get turned in. And immigrants can't get on Medicaid or anything like that. I mean, you have to be a permanent legal residence to be eligible for things like Medicaid and welfare and all that.
Well, yeah, yes, but there's a large faction of people in this country who just want to hate immigrants, as you
Right.
know, they want to complain. They'll
Right. But
complain
I can
about
tell
it.
you from experience when people came into the county ER
Yeah,
when I was a resident, first of all, our instructions were
yeah,
I'm here to be a doctor. I'm not here to be ICE or whatever we would call it back, the CPB. So we don't ask questions. We don't say, "Are you here legally?" We just say, "Where does it hurt?" So that's all we focused on. But people tended to want to avoid any of these kind of places because they're afraid they'll get turned in, now especially.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine, but also, yeah, you might have, homeless Americans too and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
mean, I've heard this from people are born and raised here. Well, this has been a pretty good show, Jeff. I don't know, maybe I'll we could probably cover a lot more in a couple more hours, but I think this is
Well, I'm getting pretty tired. That's
yeah,
why I'm asking you if you're
yeah.
gonna
Where
like,
where where
the
where
part
where can we find you out there? Uh,
uh, well,
your
you
book's
could
on Amazon, but yeah,
yeah, you go to cato.org, cato.org. And if you go up on the top, there's a banner and it says experts and there's a drop down
yeah,
menu. I'm a policy expert. Click, we're in alphabetical order. You click on my name, takes you to my page, which has everything I've ever written for Cato on that page,
yeah,
including books, white papers,
yeah,
whatever, blog posts. So that's how you can find me.
yeah.
Um,
Okay, well, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel, Escape from the Village, check out my Substack. People are giving me money to buy me a coffee. Thank you for coming on, Jeff Singer. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.